We're recapping the scouting combine with Coach Gene Clemons of Giants Country. That's coming up next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, and we've got a big week of shows coming up for you. We're going to be talking post-combine stuff, draft, free agency, all kinds of great stuff coming up here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, or if you're watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. We appreciate you. And speaking of appreciation, on the screen, joining me back by popular demand is Coach Gene Clemons, writer from Giants Country. And he did a bang-up job, folks, last week on the coverage of the Combine. If you did not check out Giants Country, Coach Gene had winners and losers from all the position groups. He previewed everything, just absolutely did a fantastic job. Coach Gene, thanks so much for coming on to talk about the Combine this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Always an excellent time of the year to be able to see these young men get to, take another step towards their goals. And we get an opportunity to see who might be possible future Giants. So that's always fun as well.
And a lot of future Giants certainly in this draft class, a lot of tough decisions. Gene, first let me start off by asking you your overall thoughts. You watched the drills, you were keeping track of everything. What were your overall thoughts about this class? Any particular group that maybe stood out more than you thought it would, or any disappointed a little bit more than you thought it would?
No, actually, I thought every group really knocked it out the box. I would have loved to have seen more out of the tight ends. I also think that overall, a lot of the players decided to not do certain drills. And for me, the L drill or the 3-cone drill and the 20-yard shuttle, those two drills to me are the most football correlated when it comes to movement. And so I would have loved to have seen more times from the 3-cone drill and from the 20-yard shuttle, but it seemed as if it was strategic for a lot of these players to just run 40s, do vertical jump, do broad jump. Some people just did broad jump and not vertical jump. Some people just did a vertical jump and not broad jump. I see more and more people opting out of doing bench press. I don't really particularly mind the fact that they don't do bench press from the standpoint that I don't think bench press is a correlation to football at all. I do, however, think it sends a message that you're not confident in your strength. And there's no excuse for any of these guys to not be strong. They all come from most all of the guys who are invited to the Combine come from programs with really good strength and conditioning programs. So if you're not in that weight room, eating those weights on a regular basis over the last 3 or 4 years of your collegiate career, and if you didn't hit the weight room hard, if you just worried about the 40-yard dash, then that's why. And I think that's to be said something. That's something to be said because when you're looking at the bench press, it's a confidence thing. Hey, I'm going to go up here and show them how many times I can rep this, even though I know it has no actual correlation to football.
Interesting perspective. And you're right. A lot of guys did cherry pick which drills they were going to do and which drills they weren't going to do. And, then there were some guys who showed up for the medicals and who didn't work out at all, whether it be because they were recovering from medicals themselves, or maybe they just didn't like the track on at Lucas Oil Stadium. Now, one thing that popped out, Gene, and you wrote this in your daily summaries, speed. My gosh, can you ever recall so much speed and not just at one position group? We're talking
at every
several.
position group. at every position group, I don't think we've ever seen a draft with at the depth of speed. The issue that I have, and it was fantastic to watch these guys run these fast times, but I think we saw more this year than others. People run times that didn't correlate to what we saw on film. And I think that's the biggest thing that makes you go, do I need to go back and check this film again to see exactly why I didn't see this level of speed on display regularly? But I also think that we have to remember that the combine is now its own competition, if you will. So people were preparing for the combine. They weren't preparing for football. They were preparing for the combine and to perform well at the combine. And so maybe the cherry picking of those different individual things was what they focused on beforehand. And we can tell that everybody seemed to focus on the 40 because people were out there running stupid fast times. I mean, ridiculously fast times. Defensive linemen running 4.5s and 4.7s and 4.3s. Like what? Like 300-pounders running sub 330, running sub 5 seconds and running 4.78s. And it was phenomenal to watch. It was great. And we know that the 40 is the premier event at the combine, which is interesting because it's not even the premier correlation drill. But to watch people go that fast and run that fast was definitely something to see.
So with that said, I mean, yeah, it was something to see, and I was amazed at when those the official times were coming in. But as you pointed out, defensive linemen, offensive linemen, they really don't have to run 40 yards. Not often at any rate. So why get too excited about that? I mean, why even ask them to do that type of drill? I would think a 10-yard rush would be more aligned with would correlate more so with football stuff.
Well, I think one of the things you want to see is if you made a 10-yard run, then people wouldn't get as fast a time because they would stop. So like they logged the 10 yards, like somebody has the 10 yards somewhere, even if they don't release them to everyone else. Somebody knows what those 10-yard splits are. And so they will use those as far as the ability to evaluate. But also I think we're in a new age where if your guys can't run sideline to sideline, they can't play. So why it may not be 40 yards that a guy has to run as a defensive lineman or as an offensive lineman, you definitely have to be able to get from point A to point B extremely fast. Offensive lineman downfield blocking, that could be 20 to 30 yards downfield. If you don't have the speed to get out in front of these speedy wide receivers and they have to slow down to wait while you unhitch the trailer to, get out there on the edge, that's really going to mess up the timing of the play. And so I think speed is definitely necessary, and showing longer speed isn't a bad thing. But you're right, they're not really too concerned with the overall 40 time of offensive linemen and defensive linemen. Really, the more impressive thing for them, in my mind, as an evaluator, is their broad jump and their vertical jump, because that shows the level of explosiveness and how they're going to fire off the ball.
Yeah, definitely. And I would also think for offense and defensive lineman strength, the aforementioned bench press, which
I mean, I think that it's worth noting. But the problem is that if you're doing this, if you have your back on the ground pushing something off of you on a football field, that means you've already lost. So yes. It's not a correlation. I have long said that it should be replaced, and they should do something with power cleans or with hang cleans, because that's a more correlation, because the hang clean is all about explosive and full body movement. It's actually a better exercise to work on because it's going to help you more full body, and it correlates better to what you do on the field. But I still think that by showing that you have that ability to lift heavy weights or to lift 225 as many times, it's still a good indicator of this person cares about the weight room And we know that the weight room is invaluable at the next level.
All right, Giant fans, we have more still to come on today's program. But first, BetOnline is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline.net is also the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news, whether it's basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, or your favorite Vegas games. Head on over to their website today, betonline.net, and start learning about the trends and all the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Gene, let's talk about some of the individual performances, best values, guys that kind of just stood up and just said, hey, here I am, somebody you want to pay attention to. I mean, and there were a lot of guys that coming in, maybe we didn't know too much about, but who tested well, who did something that really helped them stand out. Who are some of the guys that might be fits for the Giants that you thought improved their value?
Well, there were a lot. So first off, I think that there were several defensive ends, this all depends upon what the Giants want to do. And as you know, I've been focusing in on those first 5 picks the Giants have, because it's 5 picks inside the top 100. That's an opportunity to change a lot about your team in a draft. And you're getting guys in those first 3 rounds. You should be getting starters, not guys who are situational or rotational. You should be getting guys who are going to start for you. And so if they are to stay with a 3-man front, then to me, the only place you can go in the first round is offensive line, defensive line. I know it's not sexy. I know that a lot of the flack that Gettleman got when Gettleman was the GM was focusing attention on the trenches. He got a lot of flack for taking picks that weren't sexy. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to block and you have to be able to stop people from running on you. 2 things that the Giants were struggling with at times or throughout the full year last year, and even some into the year before. So if they decide to go offensive line early, I think that there are several guys who have put themselves into good positions. Obviously, the two guys at the top from Alabama and Iowa, those guys were there. But I also thought there were some other guys who put themselves into good situations with their performances. Namely, the kid Robinson from BC, who is a guard and is a guy who's been known as a Zion Johnson, I believe. The guard from BC who put himself into a really good position because he's been known as a pass blocking guard. But what he showed at the combine was he showed the strength, he showed the explosiveness, he showed the ability to move that will let people know that he could be a guy who, can be that nasty that you want from a guard, on top of being able to be a pass protector. We know that the Giants need to improve in pass protection, but we also know that the Giants need to move people off the ball. And so a guy like that being able to show that that he has an ability to get that done was something that I believe is going to be like invaluable in his draft stock. He could be a guy who either I believe sneaks into the back end of the first round, or is somebody that's in play in round number 2. I don't think he gets out of round number 2. And with that, I think that there's the opportunity that he's a guy that the Giants might be looking at if they decide to go another way, besides, going with offensive line at the top of the draft, or if they decide to double up and go offensive line at the top of the draft and then come back with an offensive lineman in the second round. Trevor Penning, the offensive tackle from Northern Iowa, who is nasty as all nasty gets. I mean, he is your throwback 1970s, 1980s type of offensive tackle. I think he works perfectly on the right side. That's a natural position for him. So it wouldn't be him having to get comfortable on the right side. I think he brings the level of explosiveness and grit that you want in the running game. And he's a much more improved pass blocker than he has been in the past as he's gotten better with his time. Better with his abilities over time at Northern Iowa. Running that 4.89 tells us that he's more athletic. 9.3 broad jump means that he's more explosive than people may have even realized. And I think that bodes well for a draft that a lot of linemen are going to go, but we don't really know where they're going to go outside of the top two guys in this draft.
Now, let me ask you, as a talent evaluator and as a coach, we read about what these young men can do and what they can't do. At what point, as a talent evaluator, do you say to yourself, okay, this guy can do 3/4 of what I need him to do within my system. The 1/4 of the things he can't do, I feel that if we get half of that, we're in good shape. I mean, how do you kind of weigh out where a guy is in terms of maybe his ceiling? Has he hit his ceiling in certain areas? And how do you kind of put a grade to that?
Well, I think one thing you have to be cognizant of is in the first round, you can't take projects, or you can't take guys with holes in their game. I think that's the biggest issue that a lot of teams have when it comes to drafting. They draft a guy that has all this potential, but they haven't shown it yet. And now they're charged with trying to get them to live up to their potential. I think you should be taking guys that are plug and play in the first round, not guys that you have to build on and get better. And from that standpoint, once you get out of the first round, and then really in today's football, out of the first and second round, once you start getting into the third round, you do what you're talking about, which is what I believe has been the Belichick model forever. Don't tell me what they can't do. Tell me what they can do. We'll put them in position to do what they can do. So for me, it's all predicated on position. So for instance, if you are a receiver and you're not explosive, but you have really good hands, then my second question becomes, okay, they're not explosive downfield fast. Do they have an ability to, are they a really good route runner? So hands, route running, explosiveness. Those are the three things that I look for as cores of a receiver. If you have hands and explosiveness, we can do something. If you have hands and route running, we can do something. If you have no hands, can't do anything. So it really depends upon what you have, and how you have it. There's one thing that you're going to have. If you're a linebacker, okay, does he close and tackle? Oh, well, he's got a good motor. He can chase things down. That's great. But can he close and tackle? Oh, well, he's not the fastest. Okay, that's cool. But can he close and tackle? Oh, he can close and tackle. Okay, we could possibly do something with him. Because if he can close and tackle, that means not only could he possibly be a linebacker for me in my system, but he's probably also going to be a great special teamer. That's going to be important. Defensive backs. Hey, we know that coverage is the name of the game, but there's two types of coverage, really. When because we talk about man a lot, because in today's football, your guys have to be able to play man, because you just can't get enough pressure with 4, because not everybody has the lineup of the Rams. So if you can't just get pressure with 4, if you're going to have to bring 5, somewhere somebody's going to have to play man to man. So do they have the ability to use their hands? If not, do they close on the ball fast? And then most importantly, in today's game, when they get their hand on the ball, does it go the other way? And I think that's what we see. Defensive backs are going to get beat. These receivers are just way too good. But when they get the opportunity to make a play, do they make a play, or is it just a knockdown and now the offense has another opportunity to beat us? I think one of the reasons why Diggs from the Cowboys has elevated is not because he doesn't get beat. I think advanced metrics show that he gets beat a lot more than other elite level defensive backs do. I think Jalen Ramsey gets beat. But the difference is when they get an opportunity to make a play, it's going the other way. And if you make a mistake, it's going the other way for 7. And so, or for 6, excuse me. And so that's the thing that we're looking for. What's the one skill that they absolutely have to play at this game? And then what's another complementary skill that they have? And then from there, it's okay, well, let's put them in position to be successful. If a defensive back only plays press well, if they're not good in off man because they're not good with their spatial awareness, then why would I ever play him off man? I'm going to allow him to press. And when I want to play off man, I come in with another defensive back. That's something that the Patriots have done really, really well over the years, taking advantage of, bringing in free agents that maybe did one really good thing and not other things well, or drafting guys later in the round because they've been horrible at the beginning of the round. I mean, the round 1, round 2, they've been really good late in rounds when they have to identify those individual skills that people do well. But that's what I do. Find the one skill that you absolutely have to have, and then, okay, what's the one complementary that they have that lets me know I can take you in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round.
Okay, so building on that, the Giants, they have needs all across the board. Now, they could also have another need developing at cornerback if they move on from James Bradbury, which is the rumor. And guys like Sauce Gardner actually absolutely won a lot of people's, attention, if you will. So that being said, I mean, in looking at all angles and possibilities, that I was talking with somebody and they said, well, you can't rule out a guy like Aaron Robinson maybe stepping in for Bradbury, even though Aaron Robinson in college was a slot cornerback and we have a small sample size, he's got the size, he's got the ability to move outside if they wanted to. So you look at the pros and cons of, say, a Sauce Gardner versus, maybe a position change, if you will, for an Aaron Robinson. How do you kind of balance that, and where do you fall in on that? I mean, does it come down to what you see on the practice field? Does it come down to skill set, or how do you determine that?
Well, first off, I mean, it's not a Sauce Gardner Robinson thing for me. It's a Derek Stingley Jr. thing for me.
Okay.
But that's just me. I think that when you look at what Stingley brings to the table and the competition that he's played against, SEC competition, he's been playing against NFL caliber, defensive backs, and he went up against one of the young and up and coming studs, for a full, 2 seasons and practices every day. So for me, Stingley Jr. is my number one. Sauce Gardner is great. But I think for the Giants, you have to ask yourself, how am I getting these guys and still addressing the offensive line? How am I getting you can't do both. You can't do both, because if you think that Sauce Gardner is your cornerback 1, are you taking him with the top 5 pick? And if you are taking him with the top 5 pick, there's a chance you're not going to get an offensive lineman that's worth a top 10 pick with your 2nd pick. Now, are you going to reach for that guy, or are you going to try to look to trade down and get more value? I think this is a great trade down draft. I think there's a lot of value you could get by getting more starters, but I don't think that there's a lot of guys in here who are generational talents or 10 to 12 year Pro Bowlers or all pros. And so those guys are going to be gone pretty quickly. The Giants are only going to get a chance at one of those guys. So are you going DB? And if you go DB, are you then going to wait and get more value by waiting for offensive line? Or are you going to go offensive line and now you're probably out of that opportunity to get, Sauce Gardner, if that's the guy that you like, or Stingley Jr., if that's the guy that you like. Now, maybe they fall. Maybe you have an opportunity at 1 or 2, but then are you going to address defensive line early, or are you going to address pass rusher? You know what I'm saying? So it's like you have to make those decisions. I think that the way you look at it when in reference to your question, One guy is playing the position the way the position is going to be played in the league. The other guy, you're trying to evaluate and correlate the skills that he's done in college to what he's going to be asked to do in the NFL, which is different. I just said you don't take projects in the first round. So for me, it's Sauce Gardner all day because that's what he's been doing. He's been locking receivers down as the cornerback, as the number one cornerback, going against whoever's number one receivers out there for the last couple of years. And he's been fantastic at it. So if it comes down to those two, for me, I'm taking the one who's been doing the job that I want him to do in the NFL. Now, if I said, hey, I believe that nickelback is a starter in my defense, he's going to play essentially every snap, then I'm going to get Robinson in there and let him play what it is he's played his entire career. I'm not going to change him and now put him on the outside because I think he can do it. I'm going to let him man the slot and shut down all of these elite level slot guys that are out there. And now I don't necessarily have to shadow my number one wherever that their number one receiver goes if he goes into the slot, because I have a bona fide starter in the slot that I've drafted.
Could a guy like Adoree Jackson step up as the number one cornerback if they do move on from Bradbury? Do you think he's got that skill set?
I mean, I think that when they drafted him and years ago, I think that's what they drafted him, thinking that he was a number one corner. But it's hard to really quantify whether someone's a number one corner because it really all depends on how much action you're getting. Right. Like people are trying to move on from or thinking about moving on from Bradbury. But if you look at the season Bradbury had, it wasn't an awful season, but the entire team had an awful season. So are we moving on from the team, or is it just a money thing? And if it's just a money thing, you have to be willing to get diminished returns. You're not going to get James Bradbury, a younger James Bradbury walking through the door. You don't get his mentality. You don't get his level of expertise. You don't get his experience. You might get a better athlete at this point in his career, but you're not going to get all of the other intangibles that Bradbury brings to the table. So, if you move on from him and now you're asking Adoree Jackson to be that guy, you still need another Adoree Jackson. Yeah. So it's like, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. If you're going to commit to the position, you just have to commit to the position. You can't just say, well, we're going to bring some guys in, because you're going to end up getting cooked like guys were getting cooked last year.
All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast. But first, with the ever-increasing number of makes and models, there's only one place to find what you need quickly for your car or truck, and that's at Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business with over 20 years of offering competitive pricing on thousands of parts for every make, model, and manufacturer. Check out their website today, rockauto.com, and don't forget to write down Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and they ship directly to your door. All the parts your car or truck will ever need. That's rockauto.com. Now, I got to ask you about this quarterback rumor that came out of the combine. Apparently, the rumor is the Giants are going to make a beeline pitch to Mitchell Trubisky. The Commanders and I think the Steelers are two teams that are also interested in Trubisky, or have been rumored to be interested in him. Both of them need starting quarterbacks. Do you see, other than the Buffalo connection, which we're talking 1 year, do you see Trubisky to the Giants as making the most sense given where things are with Daniel Jones? Or do you think it might make more sense for them to either draft a quarterback on day 3 to compete with Davis Webb, sign another veteran, or just, maybe Trubisky makes sense? I don't know.
Well, I don't think there's any competing with Davis Webb. Davis Webb's not a starting quarterback. So if they're really serious about, because they said this week during the combine, during interviews, that they wanted every position to have competition. Well, Mitchell Trubisky is competition for Daniel Jones. Like when you're looking at careers, who's had the better career so far? It's Mitchell Trubisky. It's not actually Daniel Jones. So if we're looking at who's performed the best, then Trubisky coming in, if that doesn't get the best out of Daniel Jones, then there's no best to get out of Daniel Jones. You always see when coaches come in from other programs that they want to bring a guy in that understands what they're trying to get done. So even though it was a year, it's a year more than Daniel Jones has. So from the standpoint of A, we want to have competition. B, we want to make sure that we have a competent backup. C, we want to have somebody who understands this offense and what we're trying to do. I think Trubisky makes a lot of sense. If you're talking about winning, I don't know if Trubisky he's coming in there and all of a sudden the Giants are winning 8 to 10 games next year. Or 9 to 10 games next year. I don't think that's how it rolls. But if you're talking about building on something and making sure that you have competition in there to get the best out of Daniel Jones, then I think that's the move. It's a better move than going into day 3 and trying to bring in a Bailey Zapper, one of these other guys that are going to be hanging around whom I don't particularly think are NFL caliber starters. If you're bringing in guys who don't put any fear in the heart of Daniel Jones, then how do you really find out if he's built for competition? I don't know.
Speaking of which, do you kind of think there's a mixed message being sent there? Now, John Mara said that he would be surprised if Daniel Jones isn't the starter. Brian Dable said that he went to Daniel Jones to ask him what he likes to run, which would kind of indicate that maybe they're going to build around him a little bit. And this is a kid that, some people will argue we still don't know what they have in him. Again, as a coach and a talent evaluator, is that an accurate statement to say that they don't know what they have in him?
No, I think they know exactly what they have in him. I think that the mission is to try to get the top of what we've seen. Like when he's been good, he's been a guy that you believe can be a starting quarterback and a really effective starting quarterback. The problem is we haven't seen that enough. So how do we get the best out of him? So we need to ask him what he likes to run. We need to be able to try to tailor things to him, but we also need to be smart and know that most times coaches are getting 2 to 3 years to get this thing right. And it's 2 to 3 years and you're out the door. So I can't waste a year. If I want to be a long-term head coach, I can't waste a year trying to figure out what a quarterback's going to do in year whatever. Like if that's not my guy, I need to start making plans to shift to something else as we go forward. And I think that it's not a mixed message, it's the message that they've been sending. We want competition. So if you bring in Mitchell Trubisky, you're saying if we want competition at every position, then that means quarterback as well. It doesn't mean that we don't want Daniel Jones to be our starter, but we want Daniel Jones to earn that starting spot and not just be handed to him.
Wrapping things up from the combine, is the Giants, we can agree, have needs from every spot. We can agree on that. But is there one position that you say to yourself after watching this, you know what, they'd be better off if they go to free agency because it's not really a good class here, given what they need?
Well, because what they have, I think you can probably find a tight end in free agency. But I think everything else, to be honest with you, there's so much talent that you're going to get guys falling to them in the second and third round that people have a first round grade on. And when that happens, it's just the opportunities are out there for them to really reshape this roster with guys who are starters or starting caliber guys that then become second starters so that the depth is what you want. So I think tight end is something that unless guys start falling a lot further than those top 3 or 4 guys are going to fall, I think you could address that in the in free agency. Maybe receiver you could address in free agency with the understanding that you do have a core number of guys that are already there who we've all seen be able to get the job done at one point in time or another. But everything else, man, I think that even running back, like you could probably find somebody out there. Maybe there's a chance to bring Booker back on a lesser deal. Because I really didn't understand them just letting him go. I didn't think his number was that big, but maybe they saw something that they could finagle. But outside of that, I mean, the talent here to get fresh legs, fresh bodies, and get them locked up for the next 4 years, I think you definitely want to go draft.
Okay. Now, final question for you, Gene. No team can accommodate or fill every need in an offseason, especially when a team has as many needs as the Giants. If you had to prioritize, and we know offensive line is going to be up there, I mean, that's probably number one. But if you had to prioritize or maybe group them into gotta have, would be nice to have, and we can get by if we don't have this year, what would be how would you break the position units up?
Okay, so I think there's one legit gotta have offensive line. But I actually think because of the number of picks that they have, especially in those first 3 rounds, they could address a few needs right there. And I'll tell you how to get it done. First round, you can go a combination of offensive line, defensive line, depending upon how you want to go. Offensive line, if you go offensive line early, you go defensive line secondary, you're probably thinking edge rusher. You're probably thinking something like a Walker or a Johnson. Thibodeau will be gone by then. Hutchinson will be gone by then. Walker, Johnson out of Florida State. If for some reason somebody's stupid and that big mamma jammer from Georgia gets an opportunity to get to them and they're able to put that guy in there, that changes the dynamic. They could either go defensive line first, and now you're talking about a chance at maybe a Thibodeau, but now you're thinking more of possibly making a move with Lawrence to the inside because you need to show up that inside. Second round, your pick now becomes a swing. Do I double back on an interior guy? Now possibly the kid out of UConn who can come in and be another big guy in the middle with athleticism that can play, or do I double back with an offensive lineman? There are plenty of guys that are going to fall into that early second round pick because there's just too many of them for them all to go in the first round. You're going to have a first round guy. So I think that combination of those first 3 picks are offensive and defensive linemen. 2 offensive linemen and a defensive lineman, or 2 defensive linemen and an offensive lineman. Now with those 2 picks in the third round, that's the opportunity where you could improve at linebacker. I think you've got a kid like Mama, the kid out of Montana State, Anderson, who really performed well at the combine, who I think both of those guys fit today's mode of linebacker, which is athletic speed, similar to running backs, with the ability to come up and close. And when you have that ability to close, that changes everything. I think you can address that there, and then you could also address defensive back in that round as well, because again, there's just too many of them. They're not going to all go in the first 60 picks. There are going to be so many of them out there that they're going to have to fall. So I think that's kind of the way you set it down. Offensive and defensive line, got to have it. Linebacker, especially interior linebacker, you got to have one. Defensive back, you need one. So, and then everything else kind of falls from there, and you fill it in as you go along.
Sounds good. Sounds like a plan to me. But of course, trying to figure out what Joe Shane and Brian Dable,
You
you know,
don't
new
make the
head coach.
decisions, that's for
Yeah, they're
sure.
making the decisions, and we have no really history that we can go back on and say, oh, okay, that these guys like this particular type of player or prioritize this because, and plus we don't know what they're going to run. So this is making it all kind of challenging. But you know what? That's why this is so much fun to kind of break this down and take educated guesses on all this stuff. So.
Yeah, no, that's what makes it. That's what makes it awesome.
Absolutely. All right, great stuff as always. Coach Gene Clemons of Giants Country. Make sure you check out his work. He also writes for The Athletic, has a YouTube channel. I'll put all that information for you guys in the show notes if you want to follow him along, which I recommend you do because this man is just amazing. Does great stuff. Giant fans, make sure you keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast. We've got a great week of shows coming up for you. We're going to have scheduled. We have Tony Pauline coming on. Jordan Reed of ESPN is going to be on with us. We've got the live show on Friday with the Entertainer. And I've got my special interview with a member of the Giants defense, which you will find out who that is. Probably announce it in the next show. So make sure you keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day or your first watch if you're on YouTube. For Gene Clemons, I'm Patricia Traina. We will talk to you again tomorrow, Giant fans.